80% saying they want to act on climate. When you ask them then, do you really act on it? I would say we're going down to around 10%. One company told us, what's the problem? We don't need to measure employees commuting. We're simply counting the cars in the parking lot. For real. For real. I mean, are you measuring your weight by looking at the mirror? Sustainability in most companies' way of thinking is, in order to be more sustainable, you have to do less. But selling less, it means less revenues, right? I mean, it's counterintuitive. The one that really acted the fastest were the CFOs. When we spoke to CFOs, they acted the fastest. It was incredible. It was remarkable. But sustainability cannot be the responsibility of a single person. It just cannot.
Welcome back to the Plucky Bamboo Podcast, where we get into the real stories and strategies behind scaling sustainability-focused businesses. Today, I'm joined by Gilad Regev, founder of Kora, a climate tech company building real-time carbon tracking tools to turn employee behavior into measurable decarbonization. This episode is packed with hard truths and tactical insight for anyone selling into complex B2B environments. Here are some of the things we talk about: why most sustainability officers don't have the budget or power to drive change, and who you should be selling to instead; how to engage entire organizations on Scope 3 emissions without falling into greenwashing theatre; and what it really takes to build a product that makes carbon data actionable, not just compliant. If you're building for enterprise, navigating regulations, or trying to tie sustainability to bottom line value, this one is for you. Let's get into it. Hi Gilad, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, hi Chris, and thanks for having me. Sure. I started my career as an investment banker, or specifically M&A person, and was working for many, many years in doing transactions. And then I decided that I want to do something more meaningful. I started to look into sustainability already in 2004, 21 years ago, it was quite unusual. I mean, not many people were talking about sustainability at that time. I made my first investment into renewable energy in 2004. And then 2011, I decided that that's what I want to do in my life. I want to dedicate my life to stop climate change, because I thought it was my responsibility to do that towards my children and few other children that live in this world, and also for ourselves. So this is the background. Now we're working on my second startup, which is Kora. And the idea of Kora is really to scale up a solution, an economical solution for decarbonization.
Can you tell us a little bit about Kora and what the turning point was that made you create it?
That's a very, very good question. And this is also my views about, the whole conversation about climate sustainability and why there is such a huge gap between us wanting to act on climate and us actually acting on climate. If you look at studies made in the US and Europe, 80%-ish saying they want to act on climate. When you ask them then, do you really act on it? I would say we're going down to around 10%, rough numbers. Oh, if you think about what is the key KPI on acting on climate, is understanding the gram, kilogram, or ton of CO2 emissions. That's the key. Yes, there is also the issue of the plastics. I mean, climate is a very complex problem, but if I would need to choose a single KPI, I would say acting on avoiding or reducing carbon emissions. That would be the first thing we need to do. We don't get what is our carbon footprint. And if I will tell you that mine today, because I was measuring it with Kora, was 3 kilograms, it will also not tell you much. For most people, if I will say my carbon footprint today was so far 3 kilo or 15 kilo or 10 kilograms, it will say nothing. Now, we used to act on data. When we go dieting, we act on the scale. If I will tell you my height, even if it's centimeters, you will get it, right? We get things and we act based on data. And what really drives me, number one, was the fact that people don't understand what is that measurement of carbon. Number two, from day one, I did not like the idea that if we want to act on sustainability, we created, because you have to create an economical tool to act on climate, because climate is an economical problem. And what we created is yet another tax system, which is the carbon credits. I didn't like the idea of using a taxation system for negative behavior. And what I wanted to have is exactly the other way around, to encourage or to reward a positive action. If you think about it, thanks to subsidies, we have today a very low cost energy from wind and solar, and also batteries are becoming very, very low cost. So I believe from day one that that's the way to act. And third, and not least, I don't trust governments to make the change. I don't believe in the top-down approach. The only thing that government can do is acting on the regulations and the punishment side. Now, the reason why governments cannot act is not because they don't want. It's much more basic than that. If you look at climate is a slow motion development. It's not like the virus that came, boom, into our life, right? But it's developing over generations. You cannot expect, and I'm not complaining, you just cannot expect a politicians that's sitting 4 years in office at best, right, to look into how do we resolve a problem that's developing over generations. There is mismatch here on the clock. So I thought that as individual, as entrepreneur, that looking at my children, my next generations, I have enough time that I can devote in order to develop solution for fighting climate. So these are the three reasons, or the three things that I was kind of meditating on that led into the creation of Kora.
The thing you mentioned about the carbon footprint, the WWF has a footprint calculator, and I remember doing that about a year ago now, and I remember being in the top 20% mainly because I don't own a petrol car and I take flights very, very rarely, and that's almost all the carbon that most people have. But even that, you take the calculator, it's still just an estimation, and I'm sure it doesn't take everything into account because it's just not possible to.
Chris, not so sorry to jump
Yeah.
in. Not only that, you will not sit and calculate it daily. It's like you don't measure your weight once per year. We act on data. I mean, I have Garmin. I check every morning what the Garmin and the Whoop, I have both because I'm training a lot. What are they telling me about my sleeping condition? I go deep into the data and I'm acting on it. I change my behavior on the way that I'm sleeping thanks to these two devices, right? I wouldn't do that if I will fill in a form once per whatever. And one more thing, on cities level, we can actually act because many of them actually, mayors tend to stand the good ones for longer time. So you can act through cities, just to mention that.
So I'm interested to know from you then what you think the biggest barriers are for companies when it comes to taking meaningful steps to sustainability.
Sustainability in most companies' way of thinking is, in order to be more sustainable, you have to do less. Take a telecom. So if a telecom is selling less data, it will become more sustainable. But selling less data, it means less revenues, right? I mean, it's contraintuitive. The problem that we have in climate is that, again, if you go into some very serious research, so one of them was done by one of the very top research institute, by the way, is the Research Institute for Climate of Sustainability of Swiss Re, the reinsurance. Because, the insurance industry already understood very early that they are in serious danger to exist due to climate. And we just saw what happened. So, I think they started in the 70s or 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And we could see what happened in California, right? I mean, I don't think that the insurance industry can take care of one fire that, I mean, it was a big one, but just think about it, okay? Then you have a Project Drawdown. I don't know if you heard about them. Also made a very, very, very deep research on climate. All of them are talking about, and the same, by the way, with Johan Rockström, who wrote The Nine Boundaries and also now started to shift into talking about the economy. All of them are talking about economy being hit, and Swiss Re is talking at the range of 18% of global GDP. Just think that during the corona, it was 4-5%, just to compare, 18%. Wow. Yes. Van Rossum, I think, lately said the same, reached the same number independently. Now, the issue is that going back to the corporates, they cannot put it on their projections because most of the big companies they are in the stock exchange, most of them, and they need to report for the next quarter. Whoever runs the show now, the board that runs the show, the CEO that runs the show now, they don't take into account what would happen if indeed these scenarios are becoming a reality, because it's not something that is here and now. And as I gave the example, the way of thinking is that if I sell less, I'm becoming more sustainable. And that was just one example. There are many, many other examples. To be fair, there are many corporates that you feel that they're really doing something, that they really mean good, and they want to act on climate. One example was the letter that the president of Microsoft published in 2021. And it was one of the best written strategy that I saw on climate, breaking it to the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, explaining how do they want to act on the scope 3, etc. So same I can say about, as far as I know, Salesforce are also genuinely acting on climate. L'Oreal is doing a lot of work when it comes to packaging. We cannot dismiss that there are many companies that actually acting on climate. The thing is that, and now is that it's not enough, and the greenwashing is there. The greenwashing exists. I don't know if you saw the documentary in Netflix of Buy Now. I mean, the whole economy, the whole idea of our economy, capitalism, is that all those corporates, they need growth in order to maintain their business. And one of the people that were talking there, he said, I cannot see a CEO that will come to the board and say, okay, due to our need to act on climate, we need to reduce our revenues from 50 billion to 25 billion. It just doesn't work. So the system as it is today, there is something which just doesn't fit to our need to act on climate.
I think it's that whole shareholder value thing, isn't it? It's not just a case of growth. I think for me, one of the big things is if sustainability companies were to grow bigger and take up market share from those companies that aren't sustainable, you just, I think, are doing both in that way. You're building more business, you're continuing to grow, but you're also being sustainable. So let's bring things back into Kora then. I'm curious, what's been the biggest challenge you've had in growing Kora so far, and how have you overcome that?
Well, I still didn't completely overcome that. Still way to go. There were a few challenges. There was a technical challenge. I spoke to WWF few years ago, and they were really frustrated that people. There was a reason why I said once per year, because they said that's the average time of filling in those forms. So to get real-time data that translates into CO2 emissions or avoidance is very difficult. And it was, so we started from mobility, but now we're also bringing in energy to the mix, and we want to later do food and fashion. It is difficult. It's not easy. And also in what we're doing today, we don't have 100% accuracy. We're around the 92, 93%. I think we're in a good place. So technology was number one. Number two is really the shortcuts, because we are now, our business model is now focused on B2B. We started with B2C. B2C requires a lot of money, but due to the new regulations, the CSOD, etc., we decided to pivot to the B2B, or B2B2E, or B2B2C, if you wish to call it. It's really what we are seeing is that companies looking for shortcuts. I hear some outrageous stories there. One company told us, what's the problem? We don't need to measure our employees commuting. We're simply counting the cars in the parking lot. For real, for real. I mean, give me a break. Are you measuring your weight by looking at the mirror? Is that for real? Some of them saying we're doing surveys. Oh, we'll do survey once per year. Regulations, and I have kind of a mixed feelings about regulations. Okay, I would wish that more people will just act because it's really important. But once the regulations start landed, I see more and more companies just think, how can I go around the regulations? Rather than how can I see that as an opportunity to engage? This is key thing that we think is important. Is really the engagement. Is really to give a tool which is really accurate and create the team that acting together on decarbonizing our scope 3 on the place where we are working, because we are come and demanding the company we are working to act on climate. So here is the opportunity to do that. Or I want to consume for a company that care about the climate. Here is the tool to do that. And I can explain how does it work. But and once we started to talk about the engagement, we started to see a movement. It's all around all of us together taking the responsibility to act together to decarbonize. Because going back to what we discussed, the top down, why it's not working, in order for the bottom up to work, we need scale. And that's what we created.
I'm interested in what that looks like tactically, because I've spoken to a number of companies where typically they'll have a sustainability officer that they're trying to sell into, and that sustainability officer can't get budget or buy-in from their executive leadership. So what is it like boots on the ground tactically that it looks like for you in terms of that engagement?
You have to speak to the people with the budget, like, for example, the HR. So in the Kora case, I wouldn't say it's easy, but because we created the solution the way we created, answering the bell and the needs of the sustainability team, we're answering the bell of the HR, of the marketing, because the engagement helps to improve the branding, because we are acting for real, we're acting on climate. Also, the CFO likes it because there is a strong cost reduction in the solution that we're bringing in. And hence, if everyone is happy, also the CEOs are happy and the board. So in our case, it's really the multiple approach to the different stakeholders and the C-suite, if you wish, because we give value to literally to each one of the key ones, right? If just going back to your question, if you're just going to sell to the chief sustainability officer, that's a real challenge, because unfortunately, really unfortunately, most of them don't have budgets. Most of them are requested to focus on reporting, and in many cases they are frustrated because they are the ones that giving the bad news to the organizations. If I look historically, and I can do that because as I've been quite around, in the very early days, they were like, so to speak, 80 floors under the CEO. And then they became more and more important. Then they were sitting next to the CEO, because there was a period that it was really became a trend. And now the feeling that I have is that, again, the organizations, they're talking about the importance, but it's becoming more and more difficult for the chief sustainability officers to act. So I cannot really give an advice here, because I think that our case is relatively unique.
I guess one thing about it is, do you get that engagement from the other teams while you're selling to a company and while you're speaking to them, or is that after they become a partner or a client?
No, it's part of the process. We tested different approaches, and the one that really acted the fastest were the CFOs. When we spoke to CFOs, they acted the fastest. It was incredible. It was really it was remarkable. But sustainability cannot be the responsibility of a single person. It just cannot.
Especially in a large corporation, because when it is such a large corporation, one person cannot handle all of the details and all of the data from that many different departments. But at the same time, they don't have that much power when it comes to the actual hierarchy of a business.
Correct. And to add to that, if you really want to act sustainable, going back to the telco, how do we take the opportunity of becoming more sustainable while not losing business. And for that, you need the whole organization. It cannot be in the hands of one person. And this is, I think, what we're also bringing in. What we're bringing in is value, is financial value. We give you this tool so you can act on it. And here are the specifics of where will you get your financial value. Without a financial value, it just doesn't work. And if you really want, going back to your previous question, if you really want to sell into, you either have to show that you're saving them a lot of money, or you have to show them that you're creating a financial value for them. Otherwise, just go and do other things.
Final question for you. If you had one piece of advice for another sustainability company, what would it be?
Probably the classical one. Every startup, I mean, there is no real difference aside of the fact that you're trying what we just spoke about. You're trying to sell most of the time for someone that doesn't sit with the budget. If you go into organizations, that's the B2B, right? On the B2C, you just need to raise a lot of money. So it's all the classical things that you would advise to entrepreneurs. From one hand, fail fast. On the other hand, in my opinion, never give up. I mean, which is kind of contradict. We can have a whole different conversations about what does it mean to be entrepreneur, and I have my own views about that.
Gilad, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate that. Do you have anything else you want to say before we finish up?
Just one thing. We as a community of startups, and not only startups, and also the corporates and the cities and all of us, all the 8 billion of us. This is a struggle for ourselves and for our next generations, and we cannot fail. On this one, we cannot fail. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Thank you.